Hollywood has cranked out a mountain of westerns, but let's be honest, most of them are just dust, horses, and cardboard cowboys. The ones we're talking about here? They're the movies so hard-hitting, so flat-out badass, that directors themselves kept rewinding the reels. Why? Because these films rewrote the rules, splattered blood across the screen, and carved their names into cinema history. Which western made Spielberg, Tarantino, and Scorsese hit replay? Stick around, you're about to find out. The Wild Bunch, 1969. When Sam Peckinpah unleashed the Wild Bunch, audiences didn't know whether to applaud or run screaming. This wasn't your father's western. Forget noble sheriffs and clean shootouts. This was pure chaos, drenched in blood and filmed like a fever dream. The opening robbery alone set the tone. Children poking at scorpions, then a gang of outlaws blowing up half a town. Peckinpah used slow motion like a weapon, turning bullets into ballet and death into art. Directors couldn't stop watching. Martin Scorsese once admitted he studied the editing frame by frame, marveling at how Peckinpah could choreograph violence with such control. Tarantino called it one of his biggest influences, and you can see it in Kill Bill and Django Unchained. Every slow-motion body hit, every shocking burst of brutality, it all traces back to this movie. And then there's William Holden, leading a doomed gang of aging outlaws, clinging to the last scraps of a world that doesn't want them anymore. The Wild Bunch isn't just violent, it's a funeral for the Old West. Peckinpah practically shoved the genre into its coffin, and yet directors keep resurrecting it by watching again and again. Because once you've seen that final walk into gunfire, you realize westerns never look the same afterward. Unforgiven, 1992. Clint Eastwood waited decades to make his ultimate western, and when he finally did, he didn't just ride into town, he burned the whole myth down. Unforgiven is brutal, unforgiving, and absolutely essential. It's about William Money, a washed-up killer who straps on his guns one last time, not for glory, but because he needs the money. What follows is a slow spiral into violence, showing how the West was never about heroes, just survivors and killers. Directors fell over themselves praising this one. Steven Spielberg called it a masterpiece. Scorsese studied how Eastwood stripped away all the romance and left only grit. Even Eastwood himself admitted he wanted it to be the Western that closed the book on all Westerns. And he pulled it off. From Gene Hackman's terrifying sheriff to Morgan Freeman's weary partner, every character bleeds with moral rot and broken dreams. Unforgiven also won Best Picture, something almost unheard of for a Western in modern times. But forget the Oscars. The real prize is how directors use it as a blueprint for any genre deconstruction. You want to take apart a myth, tear down a legend, and rebuild it into something darker? Watch Unforgiven. Eastwood made a Western where the gun smoke doesn't clear. It hangs in the air, heavy, like regret, and directors keep coming back to breathe it in. The Searchers, 1956. If you want to know how powerful a Western can be, look no further than The Searchers. John Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, a Civil War vet searching for his kidnapped niece. Sounds noble, right? Wrong. His quest is poisoned by racism, obsession, and hate. This isn't about saving the girl, it's about exposing the darkest corners of the American frontier. Directors have obsessed over it for decades. Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, even George Lucas studied it like scripture. That iconic doorway, shot at the end? Spielberg copied it in Close Encounters, Lucas mimicked it in Star Wars, and Tarantino flat out admitted he borrowed it for Kill Bill. Wayne's Ethan Edwards isn't a hero. He's one of the most disturbing protagonists in cinema. And that's why directors watch it again and again. It's not comfortable, but it's unforgettable. Behind the camera, John Ford turned the desert into a character itself. Monument Valley looks both beautiful and merciless, echoing Ethan's twisted soul. The film isn't just a Western, it's a psychological breakdown painted across the frontier. Directors study it for its framing, its moral complexity, and the way it dares to make its star look monstrous. The Searchers lingers long after the credits roll. Every time directors watch it, they find something new in Wayne's haunted glare. That's why it's not just a classic Western. It's the Western that refuses to ride off into the sunset. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Sergio Leone didn't make movies. He made operas with guns. And Once Upon a Time in the West is his masterpiece. Forget quick-draw duels. Leone stretched tension like a rubber band, daring it to snap. The opening scene alone, three killers waiting at a train station in near silence, has been studied by more directors than film schools can count. Henry Fonda, America's favorite good guy, suddenly turned into a child-murdering villain. Charles Bronson barely spoke but let his harmonica do the talking. Claudia Cardinale carried the emotional weight of the whole frontier. And the score? Ennio Morricone wrote themes so powerful, directors still use them as shorthand for myth and menace. Coppola once said he rewatched it just for its pacing. Tarantino called it the greatest example of Leone's cinematic language. Even John Carpenter borrowed its mood for his own films. Once Upon a Time in the West wasn't just badass, it was pure cinema distilled, where every frame is soaked in dust, sweat, and destiny. Directors watch it multiple times not because they missed something, but because they can't get enough of the rhythm. Leone taught them that silence can be louder than gunfire, and one harmonica note can echo louder than 1,000 bullets. That's why this film isn't just rewatched. It's worshipped. High Noon, 1952. Picture this: a sheriff with no backup, a town full of cowards, and a gang of killers on the train. That's High Noon. But what makes it legendary isn't just the suspense, it's the real-time countdown. Every tick of the clock pulls you closer to the inevitable showdown, and directors have been hooked ever since. Gary Cooper plays the sheriff abandoned by everyone he thought he could trust. The tension isn't just about the shootout, it's about betrayal, loneliness, and standing alone when no one else will. The ticking clock became a masterclass in narrative structure, and filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick and Fred Zinnemann himself admitted they studied it endlessly. Even political leaders used it as a metaphor for courage under fire. But not everyone loved it. John Wayne called it un-American, and Howard Hawks made Rio Bravo just to fire back at its message. Yet the fact that one movie could spark that kind of reaction proves its power. Directors rewatch High Noon not for flashy gunfights, but to see how time itself can become the deadliest weapon on screen. It's not just a Western. It's a ticking bomb that keeps going off every time a director hits play. Shane, 1953. Shane isn't just a cowboy movie. It's the cowboy movie, the blueprint for every mysterious gunslinger who rides into town, helps the little guy, then disappears into the horizon. Alan Ladd plays the quiet drifter who tries to hang up his gun, but the frontier doesn't let him. By the time that final duel rolls around, directors everywhere were already taking notes. What makes Shane badass is how it wraps myth and melancholy. The West isn't romantic. It's violent and exhausting. But Shane shows up like a knight with a six-shooter, fighting not just for land, but for dignity. That final goodbye, riding off with a bullet wound while a boy screams his name, has been replayed by filmmakers so often it's practically cinema scripture. Spielberg admitted he rewatched Shane before making E.T. because he wanted the same bittersweet farewell. James Mangold studied it before directing Logan, openly calling his Wolverine movie a superhero version of Shane. Even George Stevens, the director, obsessed over every frame. He demanded the sound of gunfire be louder, sharper, and more shocking than audiences had ever heard. He wanted violence to feel like thunder, and it did. Shane is badass because it makes restraint feel dangerous. Every moment Ladd keeps his emotions bottled up only makes his eruption more explosive. That's why directors keep coming back. It isn't just a Western, it's a myth that taught cinema how to walk away and leave a legend behind. Rio Bravo, 1959. You want a Western directors love so much they literally copied it? Look no further than Rio Bravo. Howard Hawks made this as his personal reply to High Noon. Where Gary Cooper's sheriff begged for help, John Wayne's sheriff in Rio Bravo says, "Screw it, I'll take who I've got." And who does he have? A drunk, a kid, and a cowboy singer. That sounds like the setup to a bad joke, but Hawks spun it into gold. Directors adore Rio Bravo because it's about loyalty, friendship, and holding the line with whoever's standing beside you. Tarantino has called it one of his all-time favorites. John Carpenter borrowed its template for Assault on Precinct 13, basically remaking it as a modern siege thriller. Even Scorsese praised its relaxed pacing, saying it taught him how to let characters breathe before the storm. Dean Martin, playing the drunken deputy, shocked everyone with a performance full of grit and self-doubt. Angie Dickinson lit up the screen with charisma, and Wayne anchored it all with his steady presence. The shootouts are great, sure, but the real badassery here is in the quiet moments. Men sharing cigarettes, gearing up for a fight they might not win. Rio Bravo isn't flashy, it's confident, and directors rewatch it because confidence never goes out of style. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Sergio Leone didn't just make a Western here, he reinvented the language of cinema. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is so badass that entire generations of filmmakers learned how to shoot, edit, and score films just by studying it. You know the setup: Clint Eastwood's Blondie, Lee Van Cleef's cold-blooded Angel Eyes, and Eli Wallach's unpredictable Tuco. Three men chasing the same buried treasure, colliding in betrayals, alliances, and double crosses. But what really sets it apart is Leone's style. Close-ups that felt like interrogations, wide shots that swallowed characters whole, gunfights stretched to the breaking point before exploding in violence. Directors rewatch it because it's pure filmmaking bravado. Francis Ford Coppola called it one of the great operas of cinema. Tarantino lifted its style wholesale for his own standoffs. Robert Rodriguez studied it for pacing and mood. And Ennio Morricone's score. You've heard it 1,000 times because directors never stop using it to signal, this is epic. The three-way duel at Sad Hill Cemetery is still dissected today. Leone builds nearly 10 minutes of tension from nothing more than editing, music, and eyes. No one moves, no one breathes, and yet it's one of the most thrilling sequences ever filmed. That's why directors keep returning. This isn't just a Western, it's the rule book for cinematic cool. Stagecoach, 1939. Stagecoach wasn't just another Western. It was the Western that proved the genre could be art. Before this film, Westerns were cheap, churned-out matinee fodder. John Ford changed that forever. The story seems simple: a group of strangers riding through dangerous territory, each with their own secrets and burdens. But the execution? That's where directors get hooked. Ford gave real depth to his characters, made the action suspenseful, and used Monument Valley to frame the frontier like a cathedral. And then there's John Wayne, bursting onto the screen as the Ringo Kid, turning from B-movie regular into Hollywood's biggest star. Directors can't stop watching Stagecoach because it's the moment the Western grew up. Orson Welles reportedly screened it over 40 times while preparing Citizen Kane. He studied the framing, the blocking, the way Ford staged chaos with clarity. Tarantino himself has said Stagecoach was a giant leap forward in modern filmmaking. The action scenes are still jaw-dropping. That stunt where a man falls under a galloping stagecoach only to roll between the horses and climb back up. It's one of the most dangerous stunts ever, and filmmakers still marvel at how it was pulled off without killing anyone. Stagecoach is badass, not because it's loud, but because it's smart. It's the movie that proved Westerns weren't just dime store entertainment, they could be cinema at its highest level. Winchester 73, 1950. Sometimes, a single object tells the story of an entire world. That's Winchester 73. Directed by Anthony Mann and starring James Stewart, this film follows a rifle as it changes hands, from a sharpshooter to an outlaw, to a native warrior to a thief. With each new owner, the gun becomes a symbol of power, luck, and fate. Directors obsess over this one because it broke new ground. Stewart wasn't playing his usual nice guy. He was darker, driven by revenge, and practically snarling at times. The film launched a whole new chapter in his career. Even the way Stewart was paid changed Hollywood forever. Instead of his full salary, he gambled on profit participation. The movie hit big, and Stewart walked away with about $600,000, a massive sum in 1950, and opened the door for actors to demand a slice of the box office. Anthony Mann's direction was equally groundbreaking. He shot gunfights with raw intensity, showing the sweat and pain behind every bullet. The authenticity was so sharp that Stewart practiced with the rifle until his knuckles bled, just to look right on camera. Directors keep rewatching it, because it's the kind of detail that makes a story feel lived in, not staged. Winchester 73 is badass, because it treats its central object like destiny itself, passing through hands, leaving blood and chaos in its wake. And directors keep studying it, learning how one weapon, one symbol, can carry the weight of an entire genre. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Sam Peckinpah didn't just make westerns, he tore them apart and rebuilt them as violent elegies. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is the ultimate example. Forget clean heroics. This is a story about betrayal, inevitability, and the death of the outlaw dream. James Coburn plays Pat Garrett, tasked with hunting down his former friend Billy, played by Chris Christopherson. Their showdown isn't just about law and order, it's about time catching up to everyone. Directors keep rewatching this one for the way Peckinpah blends violence with melancholy. The editing, the grit, the atmosphere, it's all about a world in decay. Bob Dylan, who not only wrote the haunting soundtrack but appeared in the film, gave it an extra layer of myth. His song, Knocking on Heaven's Door, became iconic, elevating the gunfights into something tragic. The film itself was butchered by the studio, but even in its compromised form, directors found gold. Years later, restored cuts revealed the poetic, broken rhythm Peckinpah originally intended. Modern filmmakers like Scorsese and Tarantino point to it as one of the boldest depictions of the West as a place of loss, not glory. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is badass, not because it glorifies the outlaw life, but because it rips the mask off. It's about friendship turning into destiny, and destiny turning into bullets. Every time directors hit replay, they're not just watching a Western, they're watching cinema more in its own myths. Red River, 1948. John Wayne had already been crowned the king of Westerns, but Red River showed a darker side of him that even shocked his fans. Directed by Howard Hawks, this cattle drive epic pits Wayne's ruthless Thomas Dunson against Montgomery Clift's idealistic adopted son. It's not just a Western, it's a psychological power struggle dressed up in cowboy boots. Directors adore this film because of the raw tension between its leads. Wayne plays against type, almost villainous in his obsession. Clift, making his screen debut, oozed method acting intensity. Their clash wasn't just scripted, it bled off the screen. Hawks orchestrated it all with a mix of grandeur and intimacy, using the endless cattle drive as both setting and metaphor for generational conflict. Scorsese has praised Red River's sheer scope, while Spielberg admired its balance of spectacle and character. Even filmmakers outside the Western genre study it for how it wrings tension from father-son dynamics. That final confrontation between Wayne and Clift, two men locked in a battle over legacy, remains one of the most charged in the history of the genre. Red River is badass because it doesn't just show cowboys taming the land. It shows men trying, and failing, to tame themselves. Directors watch it again and again because it proves the toughest frontier is the human heart. Tombstone 1993. When you think 90s Westerns, Tombstone is the one that refuses to die. Stylish, quotable, and packed with swagger, it's the movie that gave us Val Kilmer's unforgettable Doc Holliday, a performance so magnetic directors and actors still point to it as a masterclass. "I'm your Huckleberry?" That line alone could carry an entire film, but Tombstone has plenty more. Directed by George P. Cosmatos, with heavy behind-the-scenes shaping by Kurt Russell himself, the film retells the story of Wyatt Earp and the legendary OK Corral showdown. But what keeps directors coming back isn't just the gunplay, it's the operatic style. Every duel is staged like theater, every line delivered like a challenge. James Cameron called Kilmer's performance one of the finest he'd ever seen. Tarantino has praised the film's pacing and dialogue. Directors love the way Tombstone turns history into pulp myth, unapologetically bold and unashamedly cinematic. The costumes are sharp, the one-liners sharper, and the gunfights downright electric. Tombstone is badass because it refuses to be subtle. It's larger than life, dripping with bravado, and unafraid of leaning into spectacle. Directors rewatch it, not because it's perfect, but because it's unforgettable. Sometimes, cool is enough. Jeremiah Johnson, 1972. Not every badass Western is about dusty towns and duels at high noon. Jeremiah Johnson, directed by Sidney Pollack and starring Robert Redford, takes the genre into the wilderness and strips it down to raw survival. Redford plays Johnson, a man trying to live alone in the mountains, only to find the land itself and the people on it will test him at every turn. Directors admire this one because it blends Western themes with survivalist grit. Pollack shot on location in Utah's mountains, battling weather and terrain to give the film an authenticity no backlot could match. Redford did much of the physical work himself, hauling, chopping, and surviving in ways that made the performance feel lived in rather than acted. The film inspired a generation of filmmakers who wanted realism in their storytelling. Ang Lee cited it as an influence on Brokeback Mountain's tone. Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu admitted Jeremiah Johnson was a touchstone when making The Revenant. Directors keep returning to it for its pacing, its silence, and the way it lets landscapes tell half the story. Jeremiah Johnson is badass, not because of slick gunfights, but because it shows survival as the harshest duel of all. The wilderness doesn't flinch. It doesn't care. And that's why filmmakers still watch it, to remember that the West wasn't just about towns and showdowns. It was about man against the wild. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. If Westerns were dying in the late 60s, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid gave the genre one last glorious roar. Directed by George Roy Hill, this film didn't just tell the story of two outlaws. It reinvented the buddy formula for decades of cinema. Paul Newman and Robert Redford lit up the screen with chemistry so natural directors still study it to this day. The plot follows Butch and Sundance as they rob, run, and laugh their way through the frontier, only to find the modern world closing in. It's funny, stylish, and then, when that final freeze frame hits, utterly devastating. Directors return to it because it blends tones in a way few films manage. One minute you're laughing, the next you're staring at the end of an era. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Screenplay, and changed how studios looked at Westerns. Directors like Spielberg and Cameron praised its dialogue and character work. Tarantino said it helped shape his own love of blending humor with violence. Even the bicycle sequence set, "To Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head," has been dissected as a daring move that broke every so-called rule of the genre. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is badass because it's charming, tragic, and iconic all at once. Directors keep coming back not just for the gunfights, but for the friendship, the laughs, and the way it redefined cool. So there you have it. 15 Westerns so badass, even the directors who shaped cinema couldn't stop hitting replay. These aren't just movies. They're battlefields where myth, violence, and legend collide. Some buried the genre, others resurrected it, but every single one left a mark too deep to ignore. Which of these Westerns do you think still rides tallest in the saddle? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep this showdown alive.